We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's September 18th here in Seoul. I'm Shin, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Park Gi-hun.
Good morning.
Good morning, and Kim Si-young.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Germany's popular Oktoberfest, known as the world's biggest beer festival, kicked off on Saturday in Munich. The city expects around 6 million people from around the world to visit from now until October 3rd, when the 188th Oktoberfest is scheduled to wrap up. And bringing the news feed back to South Korea, the Korea Institute of Public Finance has found that households with kindergartners have spent 38% more on private education over the past 5 years. Last year, the average amount spent on a child at kindergarten was around $168 a month. Researchers found that high distrust towards society, specifically government policies, politicians, and public servants, was the main reason parents invested more in their child's private education. And earlier this morning, unionized rail workers in Korea wrapped up their 5-day-long strike. From last Thursday, the Korea Railway Workers Union demanded improved working conditions and expanded KTX bullet train services to Susa Station in southern Seoul. If a middle ground had not been met yet between the union and officials, the strike was expected to go on for a few extra days, but officials have long tried to avoid this scenario given that the strike already cost a lot of money and inconvenience to the public. And speaking of inconvenience, as of 3 p.m. Sunday, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport found out only that 71% of the country's available trains were running as usual. And what caused the most inconvenience was the lack of KTX and subway trains in Seoul. Only 67.5% of KTX trains were operating as of 3 p.m. Sunday, as well as 76% of trains on the Seoul Metro. And considering the fact that it was a Sunday and many people were moving about, many civilians expressed their discomfort. Now, here in the studio, Ki-hun, were you one of the many who felt discomfort or inconvenience from the strike?
For me, luckily, I didn't have to take the subway or the KTX during the strike. But surprisingly, my auntie visiting from all the way from LA actually experienced this comfort, because she was planning to visit her friend in Gangwon province, and she was trying to book a ticket, but only found out that there were no tickets available. So she had to cancel all the plans and stay in Seoul, and I actually found out through her about the strike. But you know, but for me, I think fingers crossed that hopefully the second strike doesn't happen.
Right. A lot of people were worried that we might see an extension of the strike going on from today, and this would come just before Chuseok. And a lot of people were worried that if the strike continues, not a lot of people would be able to use these trains to go and meet their relatives, right?
Exactly. And next week is the beginning of a very long holiday, Thanksgiving in Korea, called Chuseok. So there were concerns about the strike actually hindering most of the country's populations moving around transportation to their hometowns and things like that. There are concerns about a second general strike as well. Although the first one has been terminated today as of 9 a.m., we might see a second one, which the union has said it might go on indefinitely.
Right.
So as of today, 5 p.m., the KTX train services will resume normally, and normal or cargo trains from 6 p.m., as well as Seoul Metropolitan trains from 9 p.m. today. So we'll see a bit of so we'll see a bit of sort of the trains getting back to normal scheduling, but we'll have to see towards the end of the week to see if there's any concerns for the Chuseok holidays.
Right, hopefully a middle ground is met and negotiations go on as planned. And that was our news feed for this Monday. Let's switch gears to our main discussion now. Yesterday was Gambling Expulsion Day in Korea, and we're going to discuss a growing concern in South Korea, which is the issue of gambling addiction. Take a look at the screen to find out more. Gambling addiction. This is a pressing issue that's becoming more common among young Koreans, especially since it's happening online, which makes it easier for the thumb generation to start. Online gambling, though, is of course prohibited by Korean law. Nonetheless, the Korea Problem Gambling Agency found that more than 7,000 students were treated at hospitals for gambling addiction from the years 2017 to 2021. A separate survey on around 18,000 students found that around 3 out of 10 of them tried gambling games on the internet. Around half of those were at risk of becoming addicted. Yesterday marked the 15th Gambling Expulsion Day in Korea, and in 2018, the Korea Problem Gambling Agency designated September 17th as a day to raise awareness about the dangers of gambling addiction. And before we dig deeper into our discussion topic, why don't we first find out what types of gambling are happening in Korea? Also, let's look into specifically what types of gambling are illegal. Xiang, walk us through.
Yes, I mean, according to the National Gambling Control Commission Act, Article 2, Paragraph 1, legal gambling and bettings in Korea is limited to lotteries, what we call lotto system, ran by the Korea Lottery Commission, horse racing, cycling, boat racing, as well as sports betting through the official Korea Sports Promotion Foundation website. There is also a casino that's available for domestic population called Gangwonland, which is located, as Kyun will say later, 150 kilometers or so from Seoul. But that's also very limited. That's the only casino in Korea that allows domestic residents, citizens to go. Rest of the casinos are for tourists and expats only, hotel casinos, etc.
Right.
And anything else, including online gambling, social gambling, and technically casino gambling abroad is illegal for Koreans. However, there is a level of leniency, especially for leisurely gambling. The Korean legal system do allow, up to a certain extent, if you go abroad and if you do sort of non-harmful amounts of gambling in foreign casinos, well, let's say you go to Las Vegas, maybe you bet $100, $200, you lose it, you win some money, they'll be lenient towards that. But if you are a regular offender, or if you've been caught red-handed at the spot, if you've been first offender, you'll be fined up to $10,000. But if you've been regularly caught regular offender, up to 5 years in prison or $30,000 as a fine.
I see. So though it's legal in certain circumstances, gambling has always posed a problem to society, mainly because people who get hooked onto it can fall into addiction. Also, it's often done illegally among young people who could resort to extreme measures to restock their betting money. Tell us a bit more about this societal issue, Ki-hoon.
You know, gambling has become a societal issue among many MZers because they grew up in the digital age, meaning that they had easier and quicker access to online gambling. So like right now, as long as you have a smartphone and are over the legal age, you can start gambling, online gambling almost immediately. And according to last year's report from the Incheon Problem Gambling Agency, almost 70% of people who requested gambling counseling were in their 20s and 30s, highlighting the concern of young people becoming more easily addicted. And when it comes to gambling, many people, like including us, think of the casino and card games, but online gambling sites offer like a diverse range of to arouse the curiosity of users. So if you take a look at the screen, top 5 types of gambling in South Korea reported last year was casino at 5th, stocks, ladder game, cards, and sports bet as number 1, topping at 37%. And just by looking at sports betting, there are tons of different types of bets you can actually make for each sport. So it kind of feels like having a million menus in just one restaurant for the wrong reason.
That's a very good analogy. And you mentioned, Ki-hoon, that a lot of people are in their 20s and 30s. They're reaching out for counseling when it comes to addiction. Then why do you guys think that, especially people from our generation, can easily get addicted to gambling?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest contribution to the increase of youth gambling in Korea especially is the advancement of web space, online spaces, an easy connection to all sorts of global websites as well as domestic operators of these illegal gambling. And as Kyun mentioned, they do operate a variety of different games and different systems where you can be easily hooked onto. And some of them are too easy. You can just click a few and then it's very simple, straightforward. And it does seem like you do get your money if you win the odds. And technically, the sports bet, they do it illegally because the winnings are often more competitive than the official routes. Right, so previously, I mean, if you're a young person and if you want to gamble before the internet days, you'd have to either gather a circle of gamblers, set up a place and play some cards or something. But nowadays, you know, it's not physical anymore. You don't have to actually go find a casino, illegal casino or anything. You can just go online at your own time, log on, if you have an online banking account, you can start straight away, which is part of the problem. And this makes it much harder for the authorities as well to penalize and track down some of these young offenders, as well as the normal average gamblers in South Korea.
Right. And as you mentioned, I think because of the open internet, not only can people easily access it, but they can easily get money, put in more money. Kyung, would you like to add on why our generation seems to be so hooked onto gambling?
I think the rise in housing costs, inflation, polarization in wealth, all attribute to many youngsters going all in, wishing to hit the jackpot through online gambling and even cryptocurrency. So, but little do they realize chances of winning a lifetime's worth of money in one go is very slim. But once they do, it's too little too late. So, and also another factor is how gambling sites advertise so openly and design their websites. And it's very fancy, and it almost seems like an online game.
Right.
So, it almost sounds like you've been to a couple of those websites.
I've seen many banners. It just pops up everywhere.
Especially on the web space.
Exactly,
you know, if you just go read an article, it's at the bottom, news sites and stuff like that as well.
You can earn money. And as youngsters, because they're less educated and they don't know too much about the whole concept of gambling, they will just click it. And once you realize it, you've already logged on.
You've already logged on?
Yeah, and you're just playing a few games. And if you win some, you have that kind of feeling, I can win more.
I know.
That's when you start losing. So I think it's really, youngsters need to be a bit more careful in terms of
But it's really
gambling.
hard for them to be careful because we're seeing more and more in classrooms that these teenagers are giving information as to where they can gamble.
Exactly.
And as you mentioned, with living costs being so high, it's so hard for them to actually earn money like at work and then try to buy a house. So they're looking for that once in a lifetime opportunity.
And you know what I find interesting is that the statistics included stocks as well.
Exactly.
You know, because I mean, technically stock is a part of gambling. Investment is technically gambling. You're not entirely sure whether you get your money back, whether it will actually prove to be a successful investment. So technically, you know, the whole finance system is also
It is, but then at least there's regulations, whereas for online gambling, it's so hard to control and regulate, which is why it's causing problems like addiction. And before we move on, we also asked our viewers if they've ever tried gambling and whether they would agree that one can easily become addicted to it. Take a look at the screen to find out. Hal said, sometimes the stock market feels that way. I played cards with my friends for a while to pass the time. The risks and rewards were limited to pocket money. That's a point made by Xiong as well. And You Can Change Elias said, I've been to a casino twice with some friends. In fact, I didn't even bet more than what I initially proposed as the cost of the experience. Chris Garcia said, yes, I gambled in Busan at Paradise Casino. I played roulette. Now, here in the studio, what about you guys? Did you guys try any friendly or legal gambling? Or what about your friends?
Did you say illegal?
Illegal.
Illegal.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I've always liked the game of cards, and I like board games like chess as well. And actually, one of my really good friends back in London, he became a pro poker player.
Oh, wow.
And now he lives in LA. He's doing all sorts of tournaments, big games. And so we've played quite a number of friendly games all the time. And if you're in the same quite competitive level with your friends and stuff, it's actually a great time to spend your time. Playing some poker, trying to read each other's faces, if he's got the cards or not. It's actually quite harmless fun, you would say. And
if it's done legally, of course.
Exactly. If it's a good culture and it's friendly, no, feelings harmed or anything, that's fine.
Well, what about you, Q? And I want to ask if you did it, because I know you're a foreigner
that's
in
true,
Korea. Yeah.
Yeah, because like just what Xiong mentioned before, all foreigners in South Korea are legally allowed to enter any kind of casinos, in hotels, and even like big casinos, including 강원랜드, which is open to Korean citizens as well. So I did go to casinos like every now and then until I realized, if I kept going, I'll lose all my money and become really addicted. So luckily I was able to restrain myself from continuing to go. So I actually stopped going to the casino a few years back, long time ago. So I haven't been to one in many years.
Wow, that takes a lot of willpower.
Clean now.
But that leads me to my last question for this part of our discussion. Do you think, how should we perceive gambling? Could it be another form of entertainment or something we should never get our hands on in the first place in fear of addiction?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen anyone earn a large amount of money through gambling. And even if they did, I'm sure they would have spent most of it already because easy come, easy go.
Right.
And for me, like the only source of gambling I would do, if you call it gambling, is when I play sports with people I know. So what we do is we make a small bet where the winner either earns a small, very small amount of money or pays the least out of all.
Someone pays for lunch or something.
Exactly,
the loser,
something like that. So, and it's all agreed upon. So there's no harsh feelings involved at the end. And I think if you play it right, it will be a good source of motivation and, of course, entertainment.
Right. It could be entertainment, but I think one issue that we need to keep highlighting is that people can easily fall into addiction. And that's why we're going to include a psychological expert in our talks to find out what the psychological process is behind people who start gambling, fall into addiction. We'll include her right after this. Let's include a psychology expert in our talks to explain to us the process of becoming addicted to gambling. It's Oh Ji-hee, who's working as the director at Peniel Counseling Center here in Korea. Welcome, Ji-hee.
Well, hi.
All right, Director Oh, could you tell us, how can you know that you're addicted to something, and what's the psychological process like?
Well, addiction is very severe sometimes, and chronic and recurrent kind of disease that needs professional help. And there are some signs and symptoms that you can notice, like loss of control is one, and cravings. You cannot easily feel strong and intense urge to do the actions. And the tolerance is to have the same effect. You need more and more substance or certain behavior. And then withdrawal symptoms, which is that you try to cut down or stop using substance or certain behavior, that you have physical and emotional withdrawal symptoms, such as craving and irritability, anxiety and depression. And you notice that negative consequences of life, like problems at work, problems at school, problems with finance. If you have any of those symptoms that indicate that you might be addicted. And there are some stages of getting addicted. First, you get experimentation stage, that you first try and have fun, but later on you develop to the regular use stage. That in that stage you become more and do things more regular basis. But then even then you start experiencing cravings and withdrawal symptoms on that stage. And in the dependent stage, that you develop physical and psychological dependence on the substance or the behavior, that you notice that you cannot function regularly without it. And you start to experience negative impact on your life.
Exactly.
And the final stage is the addiction stage, that you cannot differentiate something real from unreal. So you do destructive things such as stealing or lying or do things that is quite harmful.
Yes, Director. So you've given a very thorough description of how addiction stages work, how someone might be hooked onto certain even substances you've mentioned, as well as gambling. And I think the feeling and the rush you get when you sometimes win is the cause at the root of the gambling addictions as well. But would you say there's specific types of personalities that are more susceptible to addiction, especially in the maybe younger generation, in your opinion?
For the younger generation, person who is more impulsive sometimes, or person who seek sensational seekers. They try to find something new, something exciting, and do not think about consequences of their actions. And because of that, they fall into some addictive kind of actions easily. And also people with depression, people with anxiety problems, they try to avoid their negative emotions. And so that's why they try to contact something that makes feel better. Also, people with low self-esteem, they try to avoid certain situations and try to feel better about themselves, and that's why they try to contact something more fun and exciting. Or people from family of addiction, they are more easily exposed.
They could be
Prone to
susceptible
addiction,
to it. Yeah.
Right.
Professor O.
Let's go to the last question, Professor O, due to time.
Okay. Very briefly, how is the government trying to help people overcome addiction, specifically gambling addiction?
For the gambling addiction, they do important roles of regulating the gambling policy, but also protect the people. So most importantly, they offer 24-hour hotline for the people, which is 1336, and is open 24 hours. And they contact you to the regional office or regional center, and that whenever you call, they provide individual service, individual counseling, group counseling, or programs that is proper for you, and that is free.
So that you
Also,
can get so you can get this help you need straight away 24/7. You mean, I think that's quite important.
I think that's a very
for the addicts as well.
Exactly. I think that's a very important way we can end off today's interview. Thank you so much, Director O. It was a pleasure hearing from you today.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so before I end off the discussion, I'd like to ask you guys one final question. What do you guys think is the best way to tackle the gambling problem in Korea?
I think before asking the government to crack down on these illegal gambling sites, it's great how Professor O mentioned, there's a hotline open 24/7 for people who think they're addicted. But I think as adults, like parents especially, should feel obligated to teach their own children about the effects of obsessive gambling, and even teachers as well. They can also contribute by educating the students on addiction and avoiding it, and to who and how they can reach out for help when in need.
Because as she mentioned throughout the interview, I think based on your environment, you can easily fall prone into addiction and gambling. So it really depends on who you have around you and knowing that you have helping options out there.
Yeah, and I think it's time that it's an interesting case, the topic gambling in South Korea, because as we've mentioned, the Korean government also operates the bookmakers for horse racing, cycling, all sorts of bets, as well as Ganwonland Casino. So they also, in a sense, promote a culture of gambling to a certain extent that's moderated by the government. And I think it's time the government actually decides democratically whether it's actually fine to keep on continuing these routes when the youngsters, especially with the digital age, that expose a lot of stimulants, they're used to it from a young age, looking at contents and things like that. They might be looking for new stimulants in their lives. So I think it's time they really decide whether it should be legal in certain sense or heavily regulate so that we don't fall into addiction.
Given that people are doing it illegally, might as well regulate it so they can do it in legal grounds. All right, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Park Gi-hoon.
Thank you for having me.
And Kim Xiang.
My pleasure.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.